All right, so, we've been wanting to do a deep dive into Freakonomics for a while.
Yeah, it's a classic.
It is. It really is. And it's such an interesting book because it really kind of takes this look at everyday life, but through the lens of economics.
Yeah, it kind of reveals these surprising and counterintuitive insights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like you read it and you're like, oh, I see that all the time, but I never really thought about it in that way. Like, one of the questions that they ask is, why did crime rates plummet in the 90s?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Or, like, do real estate agents always have your best interest at heart?
Ooh, good question.
And they use economics to answer these, like, really interesting questions.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't think that economics could be applied to like so many different facets of life, but they really do make it work.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a whole new way of looking at the world around you.
I hope so.
So let's start, I guess, with one of the core ideas of the book, which is incentives.
Yeah, the power of incentives.
Yeah. So the book argues that incentives are kind of what really drive behavior.
Yeah, and on the surface it sounds pretty straightforward, but it gets really interesting when you start to dig a little deeper.
So give me an example. Like, what makes it so interesting?
Well, there's this really fascinating story about a daycare in Israel.
Okay.
And they were having this problem with parents picking their kids up late.
Oh, I've heard this one.
Yeah, so they decided to implement like a small fine, thinking, okay, this will motivate parents to be on time.
Yeah, makes sense. Hit them where it hurts the wallet.
Right, exactly. A classic economic incentive.
Right.
But here's the thing. The fine actually made things worse.
Really?
Yeah.
Why would that happen?
So what happened was that fine, it wasn't very big. It actually replaced this moral incentive, like the guilt that parents felt about, inconveniencing the teachers.
I see.
So now it was just like, okay, well, I'm paying for this right to be late. So it totally changed the dynamic.
Wow. So like trying to solve a problem with like this simple economic incentive can actually totally backfire.
Yeah, you can kind of undermine those social norms that are already in place.
It's funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was like, sometimes when you offer to pay a friend to help you move, they're less likely to help you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it changes it.
It turns it into a transaction.
It does.
Instead of a favor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Freakonomics is basically showing us that it's not all about the money sometimes.
Right. Human behavior is complex, It's this mix of motivations.
So incentives are powerful, but like they're kind of a double-edged sword. You really have to think about the full picture.
Yeah.
Speaking of hidden forces, Freakonomics also kind of dives into the role of experts.
Oh, yeah?
And how the information gap between them and the rest of us.
It can be used to their advantage.
Okay. I'm listening. So like when we talk about experts, like what kind of situations are we talking about?
So this is where the idea of information asymmetry comes into play, right?
Okay.
Experts, by their very nature, they hold more knowledge than the average person.
Right.
But Freakonomics is showing us how this imbalance can actually create opportunities for experts to, maybe manipulate a situation.
Okay, that's kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
So what are some examples? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, think about real estate agents.
Okay.
Freakonomics talks about how when they're selling their own homes, they tend to get a higher price
Really?
than when they're representing clients.
Huh. Why is that?
Well, it's all about incentives again. You would think, that they'd be motivated to get the highest price possible for their clients.
Yeah, because they get a percentage, right?
Right.
Yeah.
A higher sale price means more money for them, too. But the thing is, closing a deal quickly, that can also be a big incentive for them.
Oh, so they just want to get it over with.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier, to move on to the next client, even if it means the client maybe gets a slightly lower price.
So it's not that they're necessarily trying to be malicious or anything.
Right.
It's just like their incentives aren't aligned with the clients.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about recognizing that everyone, even experts, they respond to incentives.
It's about understanding those motivations.
Yeah, it's about peering behind the curtain,
Yeah.
understanding those motivations.
So it's not about assuming all experts are out to get us or something,
Right.
but just acknowledging that they have their own motivations and they might not always align with ours.
Right, and that we should be informed and aware so we can make the best decisions for ourselves. And it's not just real estate, Freakonomics, it shows how this information asymmetry plays out in all sorts of industries.
Oh, yeah. Like what else? What other industries?
Well, think about funeral directors.
Okay.
I mean, they're dealing with people at a very vulnerable time,
Yeah.
often reeling from grief and not really, in a position to make those clear-headed decisions.
So you're saying they might be more susceptible to upselling or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The funeral director, they know you're probably not going to be shopping around or, haggling over prices in that moment.
Right. No, of course not.
And they can play on your emotions.
Oh, I see.
Subtly steering you towards that more expensive casket or funeral package.
Wow, that's kind of dark.
It is. It is. But it's a classic case of an expert using that knowledge advantage.
Yeah, but it makes you think, though, right? Like, how many other situations are we in where we're at a disadvantage because we just don't have all the information?
Right. And Freakonomics argues that this is why knowledge is power. The more informed we are, the less vulnerable we are to manipulation.
Makes sense. And I feel like, thankfully, the internet has really leveled the playing field in a lot of ways. Like, we have access to so much information now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We can compare prices, we can read reviews, do our research before making big decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, think about how sites like Kayak and Expedia have changed the way we book travel.
Totally.
Or how we can research car prices online before stepping foot in a dealership.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's so true.
Freakonomics even talks about how the rise of websites that allowed people to compare life insurance rates that forced companies to actually lower their prices.
Really? Just from that?
Yeah. So it really highlights how transparency and access to information can really, shift that balance of power.
So even though Freakonomics is pointing out some of these less than ideal scenarios,
Right.
it's also giving us hope that we can protect ourselves a bit.
Exactly. Being informed, empowered.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered incentives, we've covered experts. Now let's get into the part where Freakonomics really blows your mind, like the way it dismantles our assumptions about cause and effect.
This is where it gets really controversial.
Okay, hit me.
Okay, so one of the most shocking claims in Freakonomics is that sharp drop in crime rates in the 1990s.
Yeah, in the U.S., everyone always talks about that.
In the United States, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't primarily due to the reasons everyone assumed at the time.
So things like stricter policing and tougher sentencing laws.
Right, all the things that were the big talking points back then.
Right.
But Freakonomics, they argue that the most significant factor was actually legalized abortion.
Whoa, okay, I did not see that coming. Explain.
So it's a complex argument, but essentially what they're saying is that the legalization of abortion in 1973 led to a smaller cohort of individuals who would have been more likely to commit crimes in the 90s.
Okay.
And so they're drawing this correlation between the factors that often lead women to choose abortion, poverty, lack of support, difficult circumstances, and the conditions that can contribute to criminal behavior later in life.
So it's not about abortion itself reducing crime,
Right.
but it's more about the socioeconomic factors surrounding it.
Exactly. Freakonomics is arguing that a generation was, in a sense, prevented from being born into environments where crime is more prevalent.
That's a very interesting way to look at it.
It is a controversial theory, to be sure.
Yeah, I bet.
But it highlights how sometimes those most significant causes are the ones we least expect.
So things are rarely as simple as they seem.
Right.
On the surface, huh? I'm really seeing how Freakonomics emphasizes this difference between correlation and causation.
It's a really important point because we see this all the time, right?
This reminds me of something I saw on social media the other day. Someone was arguing that ice cream sales cause shark attacks.
Oh, yeah, classic.
Because they both happen to peak in the summer.
Right, a spurious correlation.
Exactly.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking that correlation equals causation.
For sure.
But it's so important to dig deeper and look for those underlying factors, like in the case of crime and abortion.
Yeah.
It's not a direct causal link. It's about those complex social and economic forces at play.
Okay, so that's a pretty heavy example. Can we lighten the mood a bit with another example of correlation versus causation?
Sure. What about money in politics?
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. It's like this idea that the candidate who spends the most money always wins.
Right, but does that mean the money caused the win? Not necessarily. Freakonomics digs into the data and suggests that, money's influence on election outcomes might be much smaller than we assume.
Yeah.
It's often the case that candidates who are already likely to win, they attract more donations.
So it's more about the candidate's popularity or momentum driving the donation.
Exactly.
Not the other way around.
Right. Just another case of our brains wanting to draw that straight line between two things when the reality is much more nuanced.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. Freakonomics is really all about challenging those easy answers.
It's about being curious, asking questions, and not accepting things at face value.
Yeah.
You know, it's about acknowledging that the world is full of these hidden connections and unexpected consequences.
It's kind of like a detective story. But instead of solving crimes, we're solving the mysteries of everyday life.
Exactly. And sometimes those answers can be pretty surprising.
Okay, so we've talked about incentives. We've talked about the role of experts and how our brains just love to jump to conclusions about cause and effect.
It's like our default setting.
It really is.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Like, should we add anything else to our, like, Freakonomics toolkit?
Yeah, I think one more thing, and this is key. You have to be aware of your own biases.
Oh.
Particularly when it comes to assessing risk.
Okay, like how we tend to, like, overestimate the risk of things that are really visible or feel really out of our control.
Freakonomics points out that, statistically flying is far safer than driving.
Way safer.
But we feel more in control behind the wheel.
Right.
So our emotions, they can cloud our judgment.
Totally.
Make us perceive a greater risk where it doesn't truly exist.
It's like the classic example of being more afraid of a shark attack than a car accident.
Right, exactly.
Even though you're way more likely to die in a car.
Dramatic events, plane crashes, terrorist attacks, even though statistically rare. They receive so much media attention that they feel more common and therefore riskier.
Right. So, like, how do we combat that? It just feels like that's so baked into our psychology.
Well, Freakonomics suggests that we should seek out, like, solid data rather than just relying on gut feelings or anecdotal stories. Understanding those real probabilities can really help us make more rational decisions.
It's like that saying, there are known knowns.
Oh, yes, the Rumsfeld quote. There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know.
That's right. It's like...
Yeah, it perfectly captures the challenge of dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah. Like, we just have to accept that there are things we don't know.
Right.
And that's okay.
But we can always strive to expand our knowledge and be aware of our limitations.
So, to sum up our deep dive into Freakonomics so far, incentives can be tricky. Experts don't always have our best interests at heart. We jump to conclusions about cause and effect. And we're kind of irrational about risk.
Yeah, pretty much.
What would you say is the most important takeaway from the book?
Well, Freakonomics emphasizes this throughout the book. Don't be afraid to ask those unconventional questions.
Okay.
Because sometimes the most insightful answers come from looking at things from a completely new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like turning a problem upside down and shaking it until something interesting falls out.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, Freakonomics isn't just about economics.
Right.
It's a way of thinking. It's about challenging conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
Searching for those hidden patterns and embracing the unexpected. And that's a skill that can be applied to any field, any problem, any aspect of life.
It's been a fascinating journey into the world of Freakonomics. Out of curiosity, what was the most surprising or thought-provoking thing that you took away from the book?
There were quite a few, but one that really stuck with me was this idea that information asymmetry can be exploited even when no information is actually given.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think about selling a new car.
Okay.
There's this common belief that as soon as you drive a new car off the lot,
Yeah.
it loses a significant chunk of its value.
Yeah, like 25% or something crazy like that.
Right, exactly. But Freakonomics is arguing that this depreciation isn't just about mileage or wear and tear.
Okay.
It's about information asymmetry.
I see.
The buyer simply has no way of knowing why the seller is getting rid of a practically brand new car.
Right.
So they assume the worst. They fill in that information gap.
With their own suspicions.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the seller's silence is speaking volumes.
That's so true.
And this principle applies to all sorts of transactions. Like the book even mentions how online dating profiles without photos,
Oh, interesting.
they tend to get far fewer responses.
Right, because people are like, what are you hiding?
Exactly. So it's like, be mindful not only of the information you do share,
Yeah.
but also the information you don't.
Wow, that's a good takeaway. So in a world where information is power, sometimes what you don't say can speak louder than words. So there you have it, folks. A deep dive into Freakonomics, a book that challenges our assumptions, makes us think differently, and maybe even leaves us a little bit paranoid about the hidden forces that are shaping our world.
But hey, at least we have a better understanding of those forces now, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
If incentives are so powerful, how can we design better incentive? Ones that encourage positive actions both in our personal lives and in society as a whole.
That's a great question, and one worth pondering. If we can understand what drives our decisions, maybe we can nudge ourselves and others towards a better future.
I love that. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the world of Freakonomics.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even started to see the world in a different light.
Remember, the world is full of these fascinating puzzles just waiting to be solved.
It is.
Sometimes all it takes is a little Freakonomics thinking to crack the code.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep.